This is Bible School Radio, KDKR, Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC, Commerce, and KMWC, Bethany. On the web at kdkr.org and on all your devices with the Live 365 app. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, so what is ahead for consumers? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, TransUnion is a global power when it comes to consumer information and trends. They hold actual data on everyone, being one of the big three credit reporting agencies. Charlie Weiss is a senior vice president and head of global research for TransUnion and is here to give us a take on the consumer going forward. Charlie, thank you so much for coming back on the program. I know that we just had you on, but didn't have enough time to really cover everything I wanted to cover.
Thanks so much, Bob. And yeah, there's always so much to talk about, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And I got to start with something that you talked about the last time that we had together. And I wanted to bring this back up because I just don't think that people really understand this concept and understand what is happening. So I wanted to give it a little bit of time. In fact, I even went back and listened to what you had to say about it because I thought it was so good. The last time we talked, we were talking about inflation, and of course, according to government statistics, inflation is going down. The CPI is declining. Therefore, consumers would assume that meant that prices were going to fall on their way down because the inflation is. But that's not yet, that really isn't the case. There's a disconnect between prices and falling inflation. Talk a little bit about why and how that works.
Sure. So inflation isn't a measure of what prices are. Inflation is a measure of how prices are changing over time. And you would expect in any environment that you would see some level of inflation. It's actually a healthy thing to have, 1-2% inflation. It means that people are able to get raises. It means that businesses are able to pass those costs along to consumers, and it's a normal thing. We price for it, we expect it. I mean, things don't cost today what they cost back when we were young, and you can define when young was, but we could all talk about, when I was growing up, I could buy an ice cream cone for 50 cents, and now it costs $5. But what we're talking about with inflation is that over the last several years, we saw this rapid increase in prices for everything from gas to groceries to rent to you name it. And so when we talk about inflation has come down. The rate of change of prices has come down from over 9% back in 2022 to now it's in the neighborhood of 3%. We're making great progress, but it still means that not only are prices continuing to go up, just at a lower rate, but they're going up from that higher level. So if people expect that we're going to get, prices for the things that we're used to buying, from a dozen eggs to a loaf of bread to a gallon of gas, they're not necessarily ever going to come back to where they were before. And so that's the difference, is that people need to re-anchor themselves to what the baseline level for prices is, or is going to continue to be today. And when things happen gradually, you kind of don't notice. It's like when you get into a lukewarm bathtub and then someone turns the hot water on. If it happens gradually, notice it. Hop into a hot tub and you're going to get burned. And I think that's what a lot of people feel right now is, my goodness, it got really hot really fast. This is uncomfortable. When's the temperature going to come back down? And for most things, it's probably not.
Yeah, and it's the thing that I also try to make sure that everybody understands is that if you look at the 2 or 3 years we've been going through this increase in prices, I mean, without inflation like we've had it, we would have gradually seen these prices go up anyway.
Exactly. That's again what happens in normal times. Again, prices for things continue to go up. I mean, starts back with think about food. The price for grain and feedstock goes up for the chickens, and the cost of transporting the chickens and the eggs to the store, and then the people that work in the store. Prices are always going up, and those has to get passed along to consumers. But a normal rate of inflation, that kind you would see in a healthy economy, is more like 2%. When it gets to 5, 6, 7%, that for the U.S. economy in particular is a really uncomfortable rate of change. What it means is that people start saying, well, if prices for the things I buy are going up that much, then I'm going to need a 5, 6, 7% raise just to break even. And so they build in that wage expectation into their own calculus, their own conversations with their employers. And if employees are coming back saying we need a 5% raise this year, well, and guess what? Then businesses have to raise their prices by not 2%, but by 5% for them to break even. And so you get this whole wage price spiral that essentially perpetuates that higher rate of inflation. So that's what the Federal Reserve has been trying to do by raising and keeping interest rates at a relatively high level, is to essentially tamp down demand for things like buying homes, for things like that require financing to purchase large ticket purchases, and more particularly tamp down the ability for businesses, from small businesses to large corporations, to make investments and to borrow to expand. They're trying to kind of dampen the economy to bring those prices back down so that they can then bring the interest rates down, and then we can continue with that normal rate of growth. So it's a painful period we've been going through, but it's one that the Fed has really said they have to do in order to bring down inflation, because let it keep going like it's going to go, and you start to get some really dangerous expectations of that continuing inflation that makes it that much harder to break.
What is interesting is that what you're talking about with the cost of labor, you really saw this in the restaurant industry. And
oh, yeah.
I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, you really trace that back to the beginning of COVID, wouldn't you?
I definitely would take that back to the early COVID period. So you think about it, when many people were laid off or furloughed from their jobs because people weren't going to restaurants, and you didn't need the wait staff to manage it. Pretty much just for those restaurants that were staying open by deliveries, just the kitchen staff and somebody to run out the food out to the curb. But when they started to back, there was this interesting dynamic when the government, who, you can agree with it or disagree with it, but were essentially continuing to give enhanced unemployment benefits to a lot of consumers. So as businesses were starting to rehire, as people were going back to restaurants and starting to travel and starting to do all those things that required employees, a lot of businesses were having a difficult time finding workers, those people who were essentially continuing to get those enhanced unemployment benefits and were choosing to stay home, be it with their kids, to out of fear of their personal health and not ready to go back into work. A lot of people weren't returning to the workforce. It was hard to find employees, and so businesses had to bid up the price of what they were willing to pay for employees to get them off the sidelines, to get them back working. And in many cases, there were bidding wars for workers in markets with limited employee pools. And so essentially what we were seeing was that rapid growth in wages, as people that were maybe getting minimum wage before were saying, I'm not willing to come for minimum wage, but if you give me $15, $16 an hour, maybe I'll think about it. And that's what happened with a lot of employers. They had to start paying well above minimum wage, or even those base level jobs.
So is it fair to say, you have in all the politicians saying, as they're running for different elections, we're going to fix inflation. Well, it seems like inflation's been fixed. In fact, for the most part, wouldn't you classify it as being over?
The inflation is I wouldn't say completely over, but it is close enough to that, the Fed's target of 2%. And by the way, if we've got another hour to talk about it, I'll talk about how the Fed may actually believe that, and then a lot of economists think that maybe a 2% target is too low.
Yeah.
That given some of the improvements in productivity, a lot of the stuff that AI has enabled, maybe we can live with a 3% inflation rate. Regardless, we're kind of at a point now where we can say we're close enough to call it the mission accomplished that the Fed is now saying we could be in a position where later this year, maybe September, maybe earlier or later, that we can start lowering rates. But I think what that means is when politicians start to talk about we have to get inflation under control, there's always a question in my mind: are they talking about actual inflation, or are they talking about, well, we need to get prices back where they were? That whole paradigm of I'm used to paying whatever $100 for my groceries, and now it costs me $150. Got to get it back to $100. Well, there's only two ways you can do that. One is to essentially put price caps on things, which we don't want to see. And the other is to get more money in people's hands so they feel like they're now ahead, which again is sounds great to a lot of people. The question is, where's that money going to come from?
Last time that we talked, I want to follow back up on this as well. This increase in corporate database hacks, a lot of identity theft picking up, and you're seeing way more of these break-ins. In your opinion, is it that identity thieves are they just smarter? Is it easier to stay ahead of the bad guys, or staying ahead of the good guys, or is it that it's just really tough to mitigate that risk because there's just so many variables? I mean, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is I do not disagree at all with the statement that that fraudsters, bad actors, are becoming more sophisticated. I mean, there are a lot of very sophisticated fraud rings that are in place right now. In fact, from what I understand, there's a tremendous amount of investment. I mean, you actually have like call centers, you have sophisticated organizations of people that are essentially working to try to hack into corporate databases that have personal information. You see these vulnerabilities, and a lot of this is frankly just from good old-fashioned phishing scams that these actors are perpetrating on employees of corporations. It really means that the companies that have that information have to be extremely diligent about making sure that their employees are not clicking on links or downloading malware or other things that we hear about, but frankly are getting harder and harder to differentiate between legitimate emails and things that are basically phishing for us to open up our firewalls to bad actors. But there's also a lot of fraud and identity theft that goes on at the individual level too, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that so much personal information is available, as a result of a lot of these hacks and a lot of these other breaches through the dark web and other sources. And people need to be really diligent about making sure their own personal information is safeguarded. Changing passwords frequently, putting in place strong passwords, using two-factor authentication, all kinds of things that consumers need to do to protect themselves, because they can't always count on the fact that the people that have their personal information are going to be able to safeguard it to the extent that that they maybe could 5-10 years ago.
It would be interesting to know. I'm sure that you've got this number somewhere, maybe not with you right now, but how many consumers? I mean, because you manage all these consumer files, we'll call them. How many people have, or what percentage is locked up with a credit freeze? Do you have any idea?
We don't have numbers on that, largely because there are 3 credit bureaus, and we're
just TransUnion.
See ours exactly. So what I would say is probably not enough. And I think that
probably right.
Is the reality is that there's a lot of tools that the bureaus have in place that make it really easy. And just for your listeners, I want to kind of clarify what we're talking about is that any consumer for free can go to all three of the credit bureaus, TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax, and request that their credit files be frozen. And you can do that through the mail, through a phone call. There's even apps that you can put in place that literally can turn on and off. And what a freeze means is that anybody who tries to apply for credit, if you apply for credit, if somebody else applies for credit, and they go to the credit bureaus, that credit report is not going to be released to them. Your credit data, your credit score is not going to be available, and they're going to get back something saying this is frozen, and they won't authorize that transaction, that request for credit, that new credit card or that new auto loan until that's unfrozen by the consumer. So it's a really good way to safeguard that no one else is able to open fraudulent accounts in your name. And it may create a little inconvenience if you go to a car dealership and you forget to unfreeze it and they say, whoops, you're going to need to unfreeze that. But even still, better that, mild inconvenience that than somebody opening up a fraudulent account in your name and then you having to deal with getting that unwound. You can do it for sure, but it's not a hassle that people want to add to their daily to-do list.
I got to tell you, that's one of the best things that and the legislation against debt collectors is probably a couple of the best things that have come out of Congress, come out of Washington. That's such a great way to protect yourself. I mean, it works.
It does, for sure. And I would encourage all of your listeners to be aware of this and take advantage of that. If you're not a frequent credit seeker, that to go and freeze your credit, it's just one of those things where it's one less thing you have to worry about at night, somebody opening up a fraudulent account in your name.
I want to talk a little bit about the Consumer Pulse Report, but before I do, I want to make sure that listeners have a good idea of some of the resources that are available at the website. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So TransUnion has a website, TransUnion.com. It's got a tremendous amount of information for consumers about managing your credit. Everything from the basics of what is a credit report, what is a credit score, what is a good credit score like, what are the things that go into a credit score, what should you be thinking about as a consumer if you want to improve your credit score or maintain the good credit score you're doing today, what behaviors that are going to help you with that. I would honestly, say if I had to, if somebody handed me a little policy magic wand and said, what would you like to see? I would love to see more credit education taught to people in schools, in high schools, for sure. Because I think managing credit is such an important life skill that people need to learn, and not everybody's going to learn that, on their own or from, at home or from their parents or family members. Anyway, so TransUnion's got a lot of those free resources available, and really would encourage anybody that wants to educate themselves about how to more effectively manage your credit and build credit for those important life things that you want to do: buy a home, buy a car, make sure that you're able to finance, education or major purchases. All that stuff is critical, and TransUnion and the other bureaus are here to help. TransUnion.com is a great resource.
And also you can get information on the Consumer Pulse Report. Talk a little bit about that. What were some of the key findings that the report revealed?
So the most recent Consumer Pulse really talked about consumers and what are they most concerned with. And we continue to see that a lot of consumers are very concerned about this inflation thing. And that's something that we've talked about. So that's one of the important things that we've seen is that that continues to be top of mind for a lot of consumers. And when we look at how the consumer is actually performing on their credit, what are they doing with the credit they have? We've got a lot of data that we study, and we see that consumers continue to lean on credit cards as a way to help make ends meet. So in that high inflation environment, they're continuing to rely on credit cards. And we've seen that over the past year, average balances on credit cards per consumer continues to grow. It's up about 6% year over year as of mid-year. So the average consumer has about almost $6,300 in credit card balances. And for consumers in that sort of, I'll call it the low prime, consumers are actually pretty okay credit, but sort of in that middle prime section, not subprime, not the highest super prime. It's more like it's over $9,000, it's almost $9,200. And that's a lot of credit for consumers to carry, particularly with interest rates being so much higher than they were a couple of years ago. Interest rates on average are over 22% on credit cards. It's a very expensive way to finance your living expenses, and would really question whether there's a lot more growth runway, to be honest, because I think a lot of consumers that are carrying those higher credit card balances are struggling to make those timely payments. We have seen delinquencies increase pretty significantly over the last several years, and I think that's something that we're keeping an eye on. I know a lot of lenders are keeping an eye on. Are there some consumers that are in a little over their heads in terms of the amount of credit card debt that they're carrying? And so that's something we're watching very closely. And to be sure, a lot of consumers do use credit cards very responsibly. Many consumers use them just to make everyday purchases, but they want the rewards, they want the points, and they pay off their cards every month. And others that do, take a little time to pay off stuff. You have a vacation, you want to use a few months to do that. But if you're using your credit cards to buy groceries and you're still paying for that dozen eggs 6 months later, that's going to catch up with you if you continue to do that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think a lot of that's going on right now, and it's interesting, definitely interesting times we live in. Well, Charlie, once again, TransUnion.com is the website to go. A lot of great free resources, a lot of educational material. And, hey, thanks for coming back on the program. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I just want to make sure that we talked about some more of these important issues people are facing.
Absolutely. Interesting times for sure, but let's keep the conversation going, because there's always new stuff to talk about, that's for sure.
All right, Charlie, listen, good luck to you. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you again soon.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Survey after survey, we're talking about what TransUnion came up with their Consumer Pulse report, is that people are concerned about inflation. I just think it's a matter of educating what all of it means. And we're going to be doing that tomorrow with a webinar at 12 noon. I don't always want to say I promise, but I feel very strongly that you'll gain a lot by attending that. You can go to prudentmoney.com and sign up for it. But we're going to take what has been really confusing, and there's a ton of things that are misunderstood and very, very confusing about how inflation works, what the CPI really means, why aren't prices going back down, what's the outlook for prices. And we're going to cover all of that, and we're going to cover it in a very easy to understand manner. We're going to talk about the Federal Reserve Board and its role in this. Interest rates, what does interest rates have to do with anything? So we're going to cover all of that, and I promise you that it's going to be on a very global basis. We're not going to get buried in the details of all this. I think that's where everybody gets confused. And I was just thinking about all the subject matter when we're focusing on how easy it is for it to get confused. We're going to keep it very globally based and talk about the information that I think that you need to know so that you can be a better steward of what God has given you. And that tomorrow, once again, is at 12 noon, 30 to 40 minutes. And we'll have time for those who want to stick around to ask questions. And really looking forward to it. I've been wanting to do this, and we've finally got it on the calendar. And go sign up for it, get the link, and that's all at prudentmoney.com. And once again, Charlie Weiss is Global Vice President Global Research for TransUnion. You want any more information about that, www.transunion.com. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.